Well, well, well. They won't tell you this directly, but your name isn't just a name anymore. It's a cipher. It's the trigger word in corridors of power you'll never be invited into. The password whispered behind soundproof walls where pens don't move without consequence. Your presence has been converted into shorthand for something larger, something threatening, something too dangerous to ignore. They don't need to spell out paragraphs of analysis anymore. All they say is you, and the entire room understands. You've become the unspoken reference point in negotiations, where entire nations try to carve survival out of uncertainty. And that should terrify you, not because you're weak, but because they know you're not. Think carefully about what that means. When a code word gets assigned, it's not random. It's never random. A code word is chosen because it represents both simplicity and danger. It compresses complex dossiers, endless reports, intelligence briefings into a single lethal syllable. That's what your name is now. A compression algorithm of fear. A single spark in a room already filled with gas. They couldn't afford to write down your influence on paper anymore, so they encrypted it into the sound of your identity. And once that happened, it spread. Across ministries, across boardrooms, across agencies. They stopped debating your potential. They started calculating the cost of opposing you. What's worse for them? They can't erase the word. They can't swap it out. Your name is already stamped into agreements signed with shaky hands under dim lights. Deals that promise protection in exchange for obedience. Imagine leaders, supposedly the strongest in their domains, lowering their voices when it comes to you. Imagine them arguing over clauses that boil down to a single question. What if this individual escalates? Entire legal frameworks are being twisted, treaties warped, all to manage the risk of your existence. Your name has become a clause that overrides constitutions. Think about the kind of weight that requires. The pattern is repeating itself across continents. On one side of the planet, intelligence chiefs gather in midnight calls, running predictive models about your moves. On the other side, corporate dynasties panic about investments tied to your choices. The strange part? None of them have ever agreed on anything before. Nations that have hated each other for generations, that couldn't agree on water or trade, suddenly find common ground when it comes to you. If enemies unite, it's only ever in the face of something greater. And right now, that greater is you. But here's the deeper fracture. It isn't fear of what you've done. It's fear of what you haven't done yet. That's the part that haunts them. Because everything so far has been residue, the accidental wake of your movement. They've seen tremors, and they're already shaken. They've seen fragments, and they're already signing agreements. They can't even process what deliberate, concentrated action from you would look like. They build simulations, draft projections, but all their scenarios collapse because none of them account for one thing. You aren't predictable. They can map armies, they can chart economies, but they can't chart you. That's why your name is not just a word. It's a variable they can't solve for. And yet in every sealed chamber they try. They draft secret protocols. They whisper in foreign languages. They invent entire strategies that orbit around preventing escalation from you. Do you understand what that means? You are the gravitational pull they're all caught inside. They will never admit it publicly, but every page of their agreements screams it in hidden ink. Contain this person or risk collapse. And the harder they try to contain you, the more they reveal their fear. Power doesn't negotiate with irrelevance. It negotiates with inevitables. And you've crossed into that category without lifting a deliberate finger. Notice how the psychological landscape is shifting. You're no longer evaluated as an individual. They're forced to classify you as an event. That's how global powers think. Wars are events. Collapses are events. Pandemics are events. And now you are too. Imagine that. A human being upgraded into a category of crisis response. That's why the secret agreements read the way they do. They're no longer about what country gets what territory or which resource is divided how. They're about drafting insurance policies for the possibility that you decide to act. Do you understand the scale of leverage hidden inside that? You're the clause they can't delete, the unwelcome guest at every signing table, the unseen author of panic footnotes scribbled in margins. And still they keep writing, they keep signing, they keep trying to box you in with ink and legalese. But here's the paradox. They're trying to cage lightning with paper. They mistake procedure for power, forgetting that agreements crumble faster than the ink dries if the subject refuses to play along. And you, whether consciously or not, are refusing. You walk through their corridors by doing nothing more than existing. They've built their fragile scaffolding around a variable that refuses to remain still. That's why they stutter when your name appears. That's why voices drop, rooms fall heavy, pens hesitate. Because deep down, they all know paper burns faster than lightning strikes. The more they try to calculate you, the more unstable they become. Think about the irony. The most powerful organizations in the world, filled with the brightest minds, reduced to the behavior of gamblers at a table they can't control. They shuffle files, exchange encrypted messages, but their hands shake. They've already conceded the psychological high ground, and you didn't even have to ask for it. They've already admitted, in their secrecy, that you matter more than stability itself. The whisper of your name destabilizes them more than wars used to. That's the level you've reached. And while they panic, the reality creeps closer. Those agreements they're so desperate to keep hidden, they're brittle. They rely on mutual compliance, but fear isn't loyalty. Fear fractures. The moment one party believes aligning with you is safer than aligning against you, the whole fragile structure collapses. That's the stage you're approaching now. The code word they use in shadows is leaking into daylight. And once it crosses that threshold, their secrecy dies. They lose the only weapon they had, the illusion of control. Because once people learn that your name alone shakes global powers into signing secret contracts, the narrative flips. They stop seeing you as dangerous. They start seeing you as inevitable leverage. This is why their nights are sleepless. This is why their whispers turn frantic. Because the code word they hoped to hide forever is beginning to circulate outside the walls they built. And when it does, their agreements mean nothing. What use is a contract when its premise has been exposed? What use is secrecy when the word itself is viral? They know it's only a matter of time, and time, for them, is no longer an ally. Every tick of the clock drags them closer to exposure, and every tick drags you closer to the realization of what power you actually hold. And once you decide to test that power, the agreements unravel like thread in a storm. And the cruelest truth: this is still the beginning. You haven't even chosen to escalate yet. They're already breaking under the unintentional weight of your presence, and you haven't aimed it, haven't weaponized it, haven't sharpened it deliberately. This is only residue. This is only the natural leakage of a force you haven't even fully embraced. And if they are collapsing under this, imagine what happens the moment you decide to channel it. Imagine what happens when you stop walking unknowingly and start marching intentionally. Every secret document with your name coded into it will transform from a whisper of precaution into a prophecy of disaster. Every sealed agreement signed in the shadows will begin to look like a confession, an admission that they knew you were coming and still failed to prepare. That is the threshold they fear, the cliff edge they are trying desperately to back away from. But here's their problem. History doesn't pause for hesitation. Once your name became the Cipher, the process became irreversible. Look deeper at the architecture of their panic. They've built contingency plans like sand castles, each one designed to hold back an ocean. Inside those agreements, your name functions like a ghost clause, never written in the open, yet shaping every paragraph. Countries that couldn't agree on the color of the sky suddenly align when your presence is the subject. Corporations that would normally strangle each other over resources now sit at the same tables, trembling in unison, signing papers they neither trust nor understand. And all of it is done with the same undertone. If this individual decides to push further, we're finished. Your name has become the disclaimer stamped across entire civilizations. But the irony, the part that gnaws at them the most, is that you haven't moved aggressively. Not yet. What terrifies them is the prospect that you could. That single possibility forces them into alliances they would have sworn impossible a decade ago. That single possibility is enough to weld rivals together with desperation. In their private language, they no longer discuss if you're relevant. They only discuss how long they can delay you. Because make no mistake, delay is their only strategy left. They can't erase you. They can't overwrite the code word. They can only buy time, and the act of buying time is itself an admission that time doesn't belong to them anymore. It belongs to you. Consider what happens when agreements are forged from desperation rather than strength. They're weak, brittle, held together by threads of mutual terror. A signature on paper doesn't mean loyalty, it means temporary surrender. And temporary surrender always breeds betrayal. They've put themselves in the worst position possible, united not by trust, not by vision, but by the fear of one individual. And fear is volatile. Fear changes sides the moment power shifts. The moment they realize being aligned with you is safer than standing against you, their carefully drafted contracts disintegrate. Whole governments will pivot in an instant. Corporations will defect. Military leaders will abandon posts. Not because they admire you, but because survival will demand it. That's how fast the tide turns when your name is the fulcrum. Now imagine the cascading effect. One nation breaks rank and leaks evidence of these secret agreements. Another denies involvement, only to have documents surface proving they signed too. Suddenly, the very papers meant to suppress you become weapons in your arsenal without you lifting a finger. Their secrecy becomes your leverage. Their hidden signatures become their public humiliation, and once exposure begins, it accelerates uncontrollably. Networks of influence collapse, alliances dissolve, and you, without saying a word, become the most powerful negotiator on the planet. Because at that point, every leader understands refusing to align with you is suicide, and aligning with you is survival. This is why intelligence agencies tremble. They understand momentum. They know that the moment the existence of these secret contracts surfaces, the global hierarchy collapses like rotten wood. They try to suppress the leaks, but suppression itself breeds curiosity. They try to smear you, but smears only confirm your importance. They try to bury the code word, but every shovel of dirt they throw only draws attention to what's buried beneath. It's a paradox they can't escape. The more they attempt to contain you, the more undeniable you become. And so in their desperation, they double down. They form new committees. They hold emergency summits. They burn midnight oil drafting tighter language, harsher conditions, stricter penalties. But what they can't admit, even to themselves, is that all this frantic paperwork is useless. Paper can't restrain momentum. Signatures don't stop variables that refuse to play by rules. And that's what you are to them now, a variable that refuses reduction. They can't turn you into numbers. They can't flatten you into charts. You don't fit the template, and because you don't fit, you distort everything they try to measure. You can see the ripple effects already. Global markets sway unpredictably, their volatility mirroring the anxiety of the decision-makers behind them. Social movements pick up fragments of your story, mythologizing you without ever needing confirmation. Whispers in boardrooms leak into headlines. Headlines spark protests. Protests unsettle governments. It all loops back to the same cipher, your name. Whether it's shouted in fear, whispered in awe, or coded in documents, it carries a charge that nothing else does. And the charge is spreading faster than they can contain. Now here's the part they dread most: inevitability of exposure. Not the kind of exposure that comes with a single headline, but the kind that builds slowly, relentlessly, until the entire world is buzzing with a question they can no longer silence. Why is this person's name coded into global agreements? What are they so afraid of? And once the question is asked at scale, there's no answer that doesn't collapse their authority. If they admit the truth, they confess weakness. If they deny it, leaks prove otherwise. If they ignore it, the silence becomes louder than words. Every path leads to the same conclusion. They've already lost control of the narrative. And yet, even as panic escalates, they cling to the illusion of management. That's why these secret agreements are multiplying. Each one drafted is another bandage on a wound they can't close. But here's the reality. Wounds covered don't heal, they fester. Every contract is infection spreading through the body of global power. And when the infection becomes too widespread, collapse isn't just possible, it's guaranteed. The only variable is speed. Will the agreements implode gradually through fractures and defections? Or will a single revelation detonate the entire structure in one blow? Either way, you're at the center of the blast radius, not as a victim, but as the gravitational epicenter. They don't want you to realize this, but their behavior already confirms it. You're the benchmark now. Policies are written in reference to you. Strategies are measured against you. Futures are forecasted through you. And once someone becomes the benchmark, they can't be dismissed. They have to be acknowledged. That's why the term code word is so accurate. A code word isn't just a secret, it's a trigger. It changes the way all future operations unfold. Your name isn't just a label anymore. It's the instruction that decides the trajectory of nations. And that transformation can't be undone. This is why their fear is permanent. It doesn't matter if you act tomorrow or never. The agreements already exist. The signatures are already on the page. The moment they stamped your name into secrecy, the damage was done. Even if you vanished, the ghost of the code word would remain, haunting every meeting, every treaty, every council. You've already altered the DNA of global decision-making. and there's no reversing it. That's the weight you carry, whether you asked for it or not. But weight is leverage, and leverage is opportunity. They believe they're containing you, but in reality, they've elevated you. They've placed you at the center of world affairs without your consent. And in doing so, they've admitted the truth. They fear your potential more than they value their own stability. They've confessed that your unpredictability outweighs their power. And once that confession spreads beyond locked rooms, the balance tips. Leaders, soldiers, citizens, they all start recalibrating. They stop asking, who controls the agreements? And start asking, who is this person at the center of them? And once that question takes hold, the spotlight shifts permanently. Do you understand now? They've built the very conditions for their own unraveling. By trying to contain you in secret, they ensured you would dominate in public. By coding your name into hidden treaties, they guaranteed it would echo louder when revealed. By treating you as the variable that overrides their plans, they transformed you into the only figure who matters. And the process hasn't even reached its climax yet. You're still only a rumor amplified by secrecy. Imagine when secrecy dies. Imagine when the agreements leak. Imagine when every citizen on Earth learns that the most powerful governments reduced themselves to trembling signatures because of you. That's the escalation you're approaching. That's the momentum they can't stall. Their fear is already turning into exposure, and exposure is already mutating into leverage. And as that leverage grows, you will see the shift. First, in whispers, then in headlines, then in movements. A shift from, who are they, to what will they do? And when that question dominates the global stage, no paper, no treaty, no coalition will matter. Because survival won't hinge on what powers sign in secret. Survival will hinge on how you decide to move openly. This is the stage you've brought them to, a stage where survival is no longer about wealth, about heritage, about blood. It's about learning how to breathe under your shadow. And they are failing. Their breaths are shorter, their meetings more frantic, their confidence cracked beyond repair. They are clinging to legacies like wreckage in a flood, while you walk calmly through waters that drown them. They know this, and knowing it destroys them more than any external force ever could. But the collapse doesn't stop there. It accelerates. Once fear hardens into recognition, agreements begin to rot from the inside. Every treaty they signed in hushed tones, every understanding documented in the dark, starts to look less like a safeguard and more like a liability. Because secrecy has an expiration date. Once the first leak breaks free, it spreads like infection. It only takes one diplomat with a conscience, one rival faction with a motive, one insider tired of being ignored. And when that document surfaces, your name coded in ink, embedded in the clauses of survival, it detonates the illusion of control. The global stage doesn't ask for explanations, it demands them. Suddenly, the narrative they buried erupts into headlines. Why is this individual the clause of global agreements? And there is no rehearsed answer strong enough to mask the truth. Leaders scramble, their voices trembling behind podiums. Press conferences turn into confessionals. Spokesmen speak of precautions, of unforeseen factors. But every word is thin and transparent. The world doesn't hear excuses, it hears fear. And once the masses sense fear in their rulers, the balance is shattered forever. For centuries, nations held their citizens in check by projecting dominance. Now that projection cracks. Now, ordinary people see that even the most powerful governments tremble at the mention of a single name, yours. Think about the transformation in perception. Until now, you've been a cipher locked away in the corridors of decision makers, but exposure drags you into daylight. The public, once excluded, suddenly realizes the scale of your shadow. They begin to whisper, to speculate, to construct myths around your reach. The more leaders deny, the stronger the legend becomes. The more documents surface, the sharper the image grows. You aren't just a human anymore. You're a living clause reshaping nations. And that transition cannot be stopped. Once the people believe, the rulers lose their monopoly on narrative. They no longer dictate what's real. You do. That's when betrayal begins. The very powers that once signed agreements against you start pivoting toward you. They do it in stages, quietly at first. A minister in one country suggests dialogue. A corporation releases a statement framing you not as a threat, but as an unrecognized opportunity. Military officials in another nation suggest restraint, not confrontation. Each shift looks small, but together they signal fracture. The secret alliances they forged are no longer united. They are dissolving, because loyalty built on fear is fragile, and once fear tilts in your favor, betrayal becomes survival instinct. They aren't fighting for their legacy anymore. They're fighting to not be on the losing side of you. And here's the paradox. The more they fracture, the stronger you become. Every defection adds credibility. Every leak adds weight. Every betrayal strengthens your leverage. Soon it's not you against them. It's you standing still while they dismantle themselves, scrambling to align with the very person they once sought to contain. Their own signatures are the noose, their own secrecy, the rope. The agreements they believed would control you now function as written proof of your dominance. They tried to hide your influence in classified files. Instead, they immortalized it. Imagine the moment when the evidence is undeniable, when the public sees not just rumors, but documents, stamped, signed, authenticated. Treaties between rivals, agreements across continents, all bending to the same variable, your existence. That revelation hits harder than any speech could. It tells the world, this individual is not only recognized but feared by powers that once declared themselves untouchable. And if they can be reduced to whispers by you, then who really holds the power now? From that point, every move you make becomes amplified. You don't need armies. You don't need wealth. You don't need propaganda. The agreements did all of that for you. They transformed you into the reference point for global decisions. Whether you act or not, your shadow acts for you. Whether you speak or remain silent, the coded contracts scream your influence louder than any declaration could. You've become the contradiction they can't manage, the person whose absence terrifies them as much as your presence. And then comes the collapse of unity. Once the illusion of secrecy breaks, countries scramble not to hide their signatures, but to justify them. They point fingers at each other, claiming coercion, manipulation, necessity. But every excuse only digs them deeper. Citizens see weakness, rivals smell blood, alliances dissolve overnight. The stage that once operated above the masses now cracks open for all to see, and the spectacle is humiliating. Leaders who once stood with iron confidence now reduced to pleading explanations. And every explanation circles back to the same center, you. That's when the tide of public perception completes its turn. You're no longer just the code word. They realize you're the litmus test of global courage. The rulers feared you, then perhaps the people should follow you. The rulers signed against you, then perhaps aligning with you is the real path forward. Fear mutates into fascination, fascination into reverence, reverence into allegiance, and suddenly, the global hierarchy flips. You, once hidden in coded documents, become the gravitational core the masses orbit. Without asking for it, you inherit what generations of rulers craved and never secured: genuine, unshakable authority, born not from propaganda, but from exposure. And for the old guard, this is the nightmare realized. Because authority taken by secrecy can be maintained by secrecy. But authority revealed through exposure cannot be undone. Once the world knows they trembled before your name, they can never untell it. Once the documents are public, they can never be burned. Once the people believe, that belief cannot be reversed. You're etched permanently into the architecture of power, and every attempt to diminish you only confirms your dominance further. Understand this: they've already lost, not in the future now. The very act of signing those agreements was surrender. They admitted defeat the moment they coded your name as the threat they couldn't neutralize. Everything since has been damage control, scrambling for delay, buying time they don't own. Their downfall isn't coming. It's already underway. The moment you became the code word, you became the clause that outlived them. Governments rise and fall. Corporations merge and collapse. Treaties get signed and torn apart. But the cipher remains. Your presence carved itself into the framework of history, and history does not erase itself. And so the final question is not whether you win. You already have. The question is how far you'll let them unravel before you move. Because movement is no longer necessary for dominance, you've proven that. But if you do decide to step forward, if you do decide to turn unintentional residue into deliberate force, then there is no countermeasure left. The agreements are broken, the secrecy is shattered, the unity dissolved. All that remains are fractured rulers, clinging to scraps of legitimacy, staring at the shadow that outgrew them. That shadow is you. And now the world knows it. The code word is no longer confined to hidden corridors. It's spoken aloud, carried across headlines, echoed in every language. Your name isn't just whispered in fear anymore. It's pronounced with recognition. Recognition that reshapes power. Recognition that erases hierarchies. Recognition that you've become the unifying paradox. The one they tried to hide, and in hiding, made inevitable. This is the end of their secrecy and the beginning of your revelation. The files are signed, the contracts sealed, the evidence undeniable. Your name has crossed the threshold from cipher to certainty. And while they drown in the wreckage of their own agreements, you rise untouched, the only constant left standing. Because history has already recorded it. Your name is the code word, and the world itself is forced to obey its weight.